Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is Onyx Backcountry's masterclass on how to prep for a winter hut trip. So everyone, please feel free to drop in where you're tuning in from because it's always fun for us to see all the different states. People are like all over the country for these classes. Um, I am Kelly Klein. I'm the community marketing manager at Onyx Backcountry, and I'm going to be managing the class behind the scenes today and answering your customer service type of questions. We are recording this session, so if you would like to rewatch or share this with your friends, this will be up on YouTube hopefully later tonight. We also have a Q&A box open during the whole class. So if you have any questions about the app or questions not related to the class itself, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. So that's separate than the regular chat. I'll be answering your questions in the Q&A box. And then the regular chat are questions about the content of the class. And I will compile them for Andy and Jason at the end of the class, so they will answer them for you. And of course, you're very much welcome to chat with the other attendees as well. All right, Andy, next slide, please. So here is what we're going to cover today. First, I'm going to share
Kelly,
the,
I'm going to
yep.
pause you real quick. People are unable to get into the chat.
Oh, good to know. Um,
The regular chat is disabled.
it is. Everything looks good to me. Can you guys see anything on your end?
I think it says it's host and panelists only, right? Or yeah, host and panelists only.
Okay, how about that?
Someone type in where you're from. There it is.
There we go. We're in.
Okay,
Cool.
carry on.
Thanks for flagging, Andy. Um, all right. So first I'm going to share the discount code for you all to access a special offer for Onyx Backcountry. And then we'll get into the introductions. And then Jason and Andy are going to walk us through everything you need to know to prep for a winter hut trip, including gear, route building, avalanche terrain, and travel planning. And then we're going to wrap that up with a Q&A where I will ask Jason and Andy the questions you have for them that you dropped in the regular chat during the class. All right, next slide, Andy. All right, so here is our special discount code. It's for 70% off both Onyx Premium and Elite membership. So an Elite membership with this discount is only $30 a year, and Premium drops to just $9 a year. So this is actually a huge discount. And I will share the link in the chat as well if you don't want to scan the QR code. Um, and then we are also running our Black Friday sale right now, and it goes on through the end of next week, but that's just for 30% off. So if you have any friends or family who want to join Onyx but weren't at the class, make sure that they check out our Black Friday sale. All right, next slide, and we can go ahead and meet our hosts. Jason Antin is a professional mountain guide and avalanche educator for the Colorado Mountain School, and he is based in Colorado. Originally from Massachusetts, Jason has spent 2 decades guiding across disciplines, from alpine climbing and ski mountaineering to endurance-based backcountry adventures. He's highly trained in risk management and wilderness emergency medicine and is known for creating safe, inspiring experiences that build confidence and connection in the mountains. Also, special shout out to the folks over at the American Mountain Guides Association for letting us borrow Jason for the night. If you don't already know, AMGA sets and maintains the highest standards for mountain guiding through education, training, and certification for mountain guides and climbing instructors. So, thank you for being with us today, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And before we get too much into the weeds, it looks like the QR code is acting up a little bit. So if you have an alternative way for folks to gain access to that, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
I'd love to start the night off by hearing in the chat something other than QR codes. Who has a hut trip on the books for the season? Does anyone have something on the calendar that they're getting excited about? And which hut are you going to? I'd love to see those come on in as we roll into this. Kelly, you can go to the next slide. Oh, we got Jackal Hut. Nice.
Oh, we got a quick, I can intro Andy real quick too.
Perfect.
Um, okay, so Andy Sovick is a product manager here at Onyx Backcountry, and he's also the founder of Beacon Guidebooks, which is the leading publisher of backcountry ski guidebooks. Andy is based in Gunnison, Colorado, and he has dedicated his career to helping people explore wild places with confidence. He works with local experts, authors, and trails organizations across the country to bring reliability and responsibility to Onyx Backcountry's tools. Um, Andy is extremely helpful for me with everything I need to know about Onyx, so he is a great person to ask any questions you have about the app. All right, and with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Jason.
Right on. Thanks, Kelly. And I'm psyched to be here again with Kelly and Andy to share some hut related tips and tricks to help you all get prepared for some of these incredible huts that you all are apparently going to. I see lots from Colorado, some in Canada, some in Europe. So there's huts all over the place, and I'm really excited to be here tonight with Andy to show you all how to prepare for those, hopefully a little bit better. So let's start off with a recap of what we did last time. So about a month ago, we had another webinar, and it was all about how do you zone in on a hut that might be appropriate for you. We used the Onyx tool to identify distances, and then some general overview of identifying terrain from the warmth of your home computer to determine if it might be a good fit for you and your group, making sure it's a good hut for you to go explore. In addition to that, we talked a little bit about how we actually book huts and like the timeline for actually needing to kind of be on it to be able to get that hut locked down for you and your crew. There is an option to go revisit and check that webinar out by going to Onyx's YouTube page. So if you weren't here for the first one, go ahead and check that out. All right. So tonight we've broken it down with the sense that you already have a hut reservation. You likely already have a touring group, or at least narrowed it down to a group of folks. So tonight I want to talk about a few different things, and that is, what kind of gear am I thinking about? And how am I really going to start breaking down this hut experience so that I'm well prepared for it? And we're, going to have a good, safe, fun time out there. When it comes to gear, I am a very list-oriented person. I like to really categorize how I plan and pack for any sort of endeavor. And a hut trip is no different. And so for me, I like to think about it in steps. And so, of course, there's the approach, right? You need to get from the trailhead to the hut. Once you're in the hut, like, what are things I might bring that might make that experience more enjoyable and more comfortable? What are the sleeping arrangements? What do I need to bring with me to make sure I get the best night's sleep possible? Of course, one of the main reasons we all go is for the skiing and riding. So what am I bringing with me for that component? And then, of course, hut trips are really fun. Are there any additional gear items I might be thinking about as it pertains to having a good time and making that experience even better? On top of that, I think packing strategy really depends on where your hut is, what hut amenities exist, how far is the approach, and what is kind of the profile of the group that's going to be going there. For me, it's not always going fast and light, although I have had hut trips where that is exactly how I packed. But it's really about being efficient and bringing what you need to make the best possible experience.
Got a question for you, Jason.
What do you got, Andy?
Are you the type of hut goer that always brings a book, like you'll never go without a book, or are you never a book, or is it a depends thing?
All right, so don't judge me. I do always bring books. However, they're on my phone. And so I definitely keep a pretty broad library of reading for offline use, and they're kind of always on my phone. And if I am going on a hut trip, I certainly download something that I'm really excited to read during some potential downtime.
Nice.
What about you?
I'm a depends person. I usually don't bring a book because huts usually have awesome books, and I usually like picking up what's on the shelf. And
I agree. That's half the fun.
yeah,
Rolling the dice, though. You never know.
you are. Yeah, sometimes it's just romance novels, and you're like, well.
All right. So, it starts off, right? So we're at the trailhead. We got to get to the hut. So important things to note here, like, what are we in for? How long are we going to be on the approach trail? How big of a start to the adventure is this? And I'm talking about distance, elevation gain. What are the trail conditions? For example, if you go midwinter, you're almost certainly like skins on at the car and you're there. But for some of these amazing spring skiing locations, you might be in trail runners. So really knowing what the conditions of the approach trail is and what are you in for. And then the next thing I think about is like, all right, so what do I need gear wise on the approach? So I'm thinking layering system, I'm thinking food, water, hydration. I'm thinking about things that I'm going to need while I'm on the approach. And I'm going to be packing those in a very accessible area so I don't have to completely explode my backpack and try to find something that I might need. As far as actually moving that gear, I'm thinking about two typical options. One's going to be a backpack, which probably all of us have. As far as pack size, I do one of two methods. I try to be really strategic about my packing and bring the smallest possible pack I can get away with that's going to get everything in there. And then that pack is also my day-to-day touring pack. I have also done trips where I've carried a very large backpack and then kept like a 25 liter to 30 liter, Avi day touring pack with me, something just fast, light, really easy to manage. And so I have brought two packs with me. And then, of course, there's also the sled option. So Polk sleds are a great way to move large quantities of gear into a hut. However, they are dependent on the terrain. And so Polk sleds typically work best on lower angle or rolling terrain. They don't work great if it's really steep because the sled tries to pull you off the mountain. And so you want to be really strategic about how you distribute that load from your backpack to your sled. But don't forget, sleds can be a great option when you are carrying a lot of gear there. This is relatively common knowledge, but when you're packing your pack, be real smart about where that weight is. A go-to rule of thumb is typically center your back, lower into the pack. For folks that have broader shoulders, stronger shoulders, sometimes it's a little bit higher, but typically centered in the middle of that backpack. So sure, there's more stuff as it pertains to the approach, but the biggest takeaways are going to be like, keep items accessible that you're going to need. And that comes down to when you're packing your pack. And then be strategic about your carrying system. And that's going to vary. Now we've arrived at the hut, right? So huts vary. They come with different amenities, different experiences. But a couple of my favorites are footwear. So if you go to Europe, you are in luck. They just hand you a pair of Crocs and you're good to go. At most American huts and many in Canada, you're going to want to bring your own hut attire. You can certainly roll the dice and just go with your socks. But if somebody forgot to knock all the snow off their boots at the front door, you might have wet feet. So I am a fan of bringing a pretty light, super packable pair of slippers or hut shoes. I think they're a really nice value add, and they're kind of a nice thing to have to just walk out onto the deck and watch the stars at night. As far as clothing goes, this is another one. You can certainly go minimalist and not bring another second pair of clothes. But I'm a huge fan of having a dry pair of long johns, a dry t-shirt, and a dry pair of socks at a minimum. And I typically will bring with me like a light pair of like running shorts or something to just wear around the hut. And even if it's really hot out on a spring hut trip. For me, that second pair of clothing serves two purposes. One, it is my hut attire. And then two, it's also my backup gear if my clothing gets really wet and I can't manage to dry it out. That way I have gear to accompany me on the next day's tour. As far as like utilities go, this also relies on what does the hut offer. Some huts have electricity, some don't. For me, typical musts, unless you're in, Greenland during a no night phase or Alaska, you're going to need a headlamp, right? The headlamp's going to be for emergencies outside, but it's also going to be for navigating the hut when it's nighttime. Some huts have saunas, some of huts have showering systems, some don't. You might want to consider bringing a small towel. For me, I am a huge fan of bringing a power bank, right? So a lot of the huts don't have electricity. And so I do want to have access to my phone, which can be a great tool for reading books, as Andy mentioned, taking pictures and video. And of course, probably one of the most important functions is going to be navigation. And so for me, having a power bank to keep my headphones, my phone, and my potentially a headlamp charged is really important. On top of that, you want some comfort items. Many huts have mugs already there. If they do have mugs over there and you go with a big group, one of my pro tips is to use a ski strap and just leave it on your mug so you know it's yours and they're not going to get mixed up. Definitely bring some toiletries. It's great to have kind of those bare essential toiletries, a personal boo-boo kit in addition to your med kit, things like that. So think about the things you need that really increase the positive experience for you as it pertains to comfort items, and bring those with you.
What are your go-to hut shoes?
I've done I go in waves, Andy. I've gone with like really thin flip-flops, which is not my favorite. And I actually have a pair of these like rab super small booties, like low top booties, which are have become my faves.
Okay. I just got like it's like Crocs. It's not the Crocs brand. They're like Birkenstock shape, but they're like
Nice.
5 grams. They're just unbelievably light and they're a nice, comfy. I'm looking forward to that for the next hut trip.
I mean, that's the one thing. How's the tread on them?
Just pretty abysmal.
Okay. I was gonna say I've had some very, very serious near misses making my way to the
On the
bathroom in the middle of
steps.
the night. So
Yeah, yeah, good point. I'll grinder some tread.
yeah, put some studs in there.
Yeah, screw some studs into them.
So those were a few things as it pertains to kind of things you might need at the hut. When it comes to sleeping, again, it varies on what the hut offers. Some huts in other places have basically a full bed and quilts and comforters there for you. Others have nothing but a wooden platform. So you need to know what you're getting into, and that is going to dictate what you bring with you. So are you bringing a inflatable sleeping mattress? Are you bringing a -30 sleeping bag? Or are you bringing nothing but a liner bag, right? So you really need to know what the amenities what amenities exist at the hut, and make sure you bring the appropriate sleep tools with you to have a good, comfortable, warm sleep. In addition to that, if anyone's ever been in a small area with a lot of people who have been skiing hard for multiple days in a row, there might be some snoring. And so I'm a huge fan of bringing earplugs with me, sometimes an eye mask. A lot of times I just use a buff and put that over my eyes to kind of block out light. And of course, a lot of huts don't have pillows. And so I have one of those fleece lined stuff sacks that I bring with me, and I just turn it inside out and I put clothes in there. And then there's my pillow. And again, dry sleepwear, that comes back to kind of your hut attire, just making sure you have something that's going to help you sleep well at night, something comfy, things like that. Andy, back to the sleeping system, anything that you bring that wasn't on that list?
Oh, earplugs are by far my biggest essential too. The few times I've forgotten them, I just kick myself the whole time. I bring extra earplugs too, because then not only do you not have to hear snoring, you don't have to hear other people complaining about the snoring the next day because they had earplugs. So
Totally.
earplugs.
Extra earplugs. I couldn't agree more. All
No,
right. So,
I can't think of any others. That one, I'll just underline that one.
so now we're on to the kind of the reason we're here is, of course, to experience the hut, have a good time with our friends, but we're really out there to go skiing and riding. And so, of course, you want to bring with you an appropriate setup for the terrain you're going to be in. So is this a spring skiing mountaineering mission? Is this a low angle meadow skipping POW adventure? Making sure you have the proper skiing and riding setup with you, all your gears in working order. And I think that's a big one, is like really do a check on making sure your gear is not on its last legs, because the last thing you want to be doing is doing a field repair on the kitchen table, the first night, trying to make sure you still can go out and ski. So make sure your stuff's well maintained. Of course, we're going backcountry skiing and riding. So have your avalanche gear, right? You're going to want your transceiver, your shovel, your probe. Make sure your entire team has up-to-date working gear. And when I'm on a hut trip, I do a very involved transceiver check on the first morning. And then I do a very brief one every morning thereafter, just really confirming that everyone's transceiver is up to date. Everyone knows how to use these tools well, and there's no technological issues, from the get-go. Once we've used all of this skiing and riding equipment, you want to make sure that you're like keeping it in action. When I say keeping it in action, making sure you're drying out those skins every night, checking your gear for any damage that might have occurred. Because again, the nighttime is a good time to make any adjustments or fixes that are needed. So making sure that when you get back to the hut after a day of skiing and riding, your skins are good, your boot liners are dry, all the buckles on your boots are working well, things like that. I definitely carry a repair kit all the time, backcountry skiing and riding, depending on where I'm going and how far I am from getting more, fixes, so to speak, dictates the size of my repair kit. My current ski repair kit for a backcountry hut trip is about 2.2 2 pounds. But it has a lot of stuff in it that can actually, keep you in the game if something breaks. And so I'm a huge fan of carrying a good repair kit and enough things to kind of keep the trip in progress if something happens. And then, of course, I definitely have my navigational tools with me. And that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, is making sure you have a tool like Onyx to allow you to navigate and stick to your tour plan. So we've had a great day of skiing and riding. We've earned our turns, and we're back at the hut. Again, as I mentioned in our first webinar, half the fun of doing a hut trip is it's just great to be in this fun, energetic environment with your friends. And, there's some things that can make that more enjoyable. One is being strategic about cooking. So again, depends on hut amenities. Some people will serve you food. You don't have to do anything. Others, you're starting from scratch. You need a stove. You need the whole nine just to get warm food in you. A lot of huts come with some sort of a cooking system at a minimum. There's going to be a propane stove, things like that. A lot of them do have pots and pans for you, but not all of them. So make sure you do your research and make sure you know what you need to bring, but have a strategy. For me, I'm a huge fan of alternating who does cooking and dishes, essentially. And so you assign, let's say you go with a group of 8, 4 people are going to cook and 4 are going to clean up, and you just kind of switch roles. It's also really nice to coordinate menus with everybody. So pre-assigning nights of your trip and who's doing what and what that dish might actually be. Signature dishes can be super fun. Some huts, as you will see in a few moments, the approach isn't too bad. So I was on a hut trip with my friend Hendy once, and he brought a paella pan that was like 3 feet in diameter. And he made the best paella I've ever had at the Cameron Pass yurt. And so that really sticks out in my mind as like, and that trip was like 5 years ago. And I still remember Hendy's signature yurt dish, which I think was really cool. Most huts, as Andy alluded to, are typically pre-stocked with things like, and of course, this is more Colorado centric, are typically pre-stocked with board games, a deck of cards, dice, often musical instruments that are horribly out of tune, but they're still there. Things like that. So a lot of huts already have things that are great for staying entertained and having fun with your crew. But if they don't have that, those are great things to bring. And so books, games, small instruments, depending on the vibe of the crew. Some folks want to just sit in peace and enjoy the silence. Others like a little bit of music. And so bringing a small speaker, if that fits the culture of your hut touring crew, is also can be a fun idea. When you're in a hut, just be really mindful that, you're group living. And so do a really nice job of kind of picking up after yourself, working as a team to keep the hut tidy and orderly, kind of respecting the quiet hours if they exist in your touring group. And then make sure it's really clear, like how you use the facilities, right? Some huts, you use the snow for water. And so you got to be really mindful about like how you're using the bathroom and things like that. Additionally, keep that hut as comfortable as you can. And a lot of that really falls back on the wood fire stove. So if it is in fact heated by a wood fire stove, be really smart about keeping it going. And something that happens pretty often on hut trips is it gets really cold in the middle of the night. And so if I end up getting up to go to the bathroom, I just make a point to walk over to the wood stove and get it back going so that everyone gets a good night's rest for the rest of the evening.
Another case for earplugs, people getting up all
Totally.
the night, right? I actually just thought of you mentioned music and instruments, and this is my story, but last year some friends of mine they got together, all their friends, right, a couple nights before the hut trip at a restaurant or brewery or something. And they had to acknowledge that one of the people that was going to come wasn't going to make it. So they had an empty spot on the hut. They went through the whole planning. There was someone playing music in the restaurant, and they were all like, this person's really good. Like, wow, what a great musician. And they decided to ask the musician if he wanted to go on the hut trip with them, that like this was like next week. And they were like, we'll pay him like what he like makes at a restaurant and see if, and the guy was all about it. This musician went on the hut trip with them and just hung out in the hut and then played music so pro
It
tip.
adds a lot. I've been on some hut trips with some incredibly talented musicians, and it always really, really makes really adds to the environment. All right. So we talked a little bit about kind of how we're getting our gear up there as far as what pack to bring and whether or not we're using a sled, but be really systematic about how you organize and, make sure you're packing stuff really well in a systematic order. And then, whatever's on the bottom, hopefully you don't need for that approach or that exit. And then of course, make sure you leave a little extra space for other things that you might need for the group. Like maybe you forgot to account for this extra pot or, a carton of eggs, things like that. So be mindful about leaving a little extra space for group gear, both on the up and then especially on the down, right? Because most of these huts do require you to pack it in, pack it out. And so make sure you have a spot where you can kind of transport trash and additional group gear out for you. Additionally, it's a great time to use a navigational tool like Onyx to set prearranged meeting points. And so, I wouldn't call it a rule of thumb to always stick together in the mountains. And for me on hut trips, it's actually been pretty common where you might be one singular group, but you do split off. Maybe there's a fast group that wants to get to the hut early. They're going to get there. They're going to start a fire for everybody. And they might go get a couple ski laps in while the second group is just kind of taking their time, taking more breaks. That's a great time to put some waypoints on there or potential meetup locations for folks if they aren't quite sure where to go. All right. So we talked a little bit about gear as far as what to bring on the approach, the ski, the hut, and for sleep. And now I want to talk a little bit about how we tie this into planning and how we'd use the Onyx tool to really enhance the entire experience. And so for me, one of the biggest things that I'd like to do is just get on the same page as my group. And the best way to do that is to start planning your hut experience from afar. And so as we showed you in the last webinar, you can create different hut folders that are specific to this hut experience. And you can also collaborate with folks on that. You can share this folder with other folks. And this is a great way to start as a team, putting your heads together and coming up with a great tour plan for your hut trip. Additionally, it allows you to really gauge kind of the goals and objectives and expectations of everyone in the group. And so for me, what I like to do is just get team buy-in from everybody and start planning this as a group. And this is where those shared folders become really important, kind of bringing the group together and planning this hut trip. And you have anything else to add about kind of shared folders and kind of kicking things off there?
No, I think we'll do a demo here in a little bit after Jason goes through some of the things, that he likes to use, digital tools for first and foremost. But no, I think this is when we launch the feature for collaborative folders, not just like being able to share it, but being able to share it and then you add to it and then they add to it and the other person adds to it. That it was huts that I was most excited about. So we'll get into the demo.
All right. So if you've ever taken an avalanche class with me, or if you've ever taken an avalanche class in general, you'll know that there's a lot of information, whether it's a rescue course, a level 1, a level 2, there's a lot of info there. For me, I often share with my students, if you don't forget, if you forget everything, I just want you to remember these two things. And the first one is don't mess with the P slab, right? Don't mess with the persistent weak layer. Why? It's hard. It's very hard to identify and they're very destructive. The next one is don't ignore the red flags, right? And so the 5 red avalanche red flags are going to be recent avalanches. They're going to be signs of instability. They're going to be kind of rapid loading due to heavy precipitation, rapid loading due to high winds with available snow for transport, and then of course, high temperatures, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because if what I'm sharing with my students is to respect the P slab and don't ignore the red flags, then it's kind of on you all to make sure that you're always looking for these red flags. And that process doesn't start the moment you get to the field. It starts right now when you're starting to plan your hut trip. And there's things you can do to start identifying some of those red flags, like recent avalanches. And so for me, before I even get to the zone, before I even get into the field, I'm going to use as many tools as I possibly can to start painting a better picture for myself about what's going on as it pertains to my tour plan and then avalanche hazard. But this slide up here, some of those things that can really give you a big picture understanding of what sort of terrain we're in is the avalanche terrain exposure scale, also known as the 8 scale. It's categorized 1 through 4 with a newly updated 0 category, meaning you're in non-avalanche terrain. Category 1 is going to be simple terrain. Category 2 is challenging. Category 3 is complex. And the final one is extreme. And then, of course, we want to know what we're dealing with slope angle. And so, again, that is a function of onX that I can use to give me a big picture view of the terrain before I get there. And then I can, of course, measure in the field to kind of verify what my plan has been. Another one is like understanding how big these avalanche paths can be and where they might run. And there are some new features on here that I think Andy's gonna click on real quick. But on this slide here, we have a view of the 8 scale, which is a really great way to understand big picture what sort of avalanche challenges might we be anticipating in this zone. And then, of course, one of the most important tools in understanding those red flags is going to be your avalanche bulletin. And, you want to get the forecast regardless of the zone you're operating in if you have an avalanche bulletin. And you can pull that directly from the onX tool as well. In addition to, those things I shared, one of the most challenging things about a hut trip can be getting the forecast. And so what I like to do is see if you can actually get service there. And so that might be a chance for me to use kind of a cell phone mapping layer to see whether or not I may have service at this hut. But of course, if I do have service, that's great because then I can check the forecast every single day. If you don't have that option, you want to make sure you do have the skill set that we typically teach Avalanche Level 2 students of kind of forecasting on your own, or at least going off of the forecast that you had when you left service and then adapting and making decisions based on new information that you're seeing in the field. Or you can also use like satellite communications, whether that be an inReach. If your iPhone satellite messaging works, you can also ping a friend and get an updated forecast as well. But the biggest thing here is like, use every tool you can to identify some of these red flags, and then make sure that you're adjusting your route, you're adjusting your train choices properly based on what the nowcast, what the weather and conditions are actually giving you. There are some huts like the Hayden Lodge in Ouray, Colorado, that will not let you, they will cancel your reservation if it's high avalanche danger, and they strongly recommend you do not come if it's considerable. And so it's really good to know like what sort of a weather trend are we experiencing? Because if you're there and the avalanche danger elevates, you may not be able to leave safely. And so really having an idea of like what kind of weather and snow conditions are coming and what's happening in real time. And does that change my plan? Like, do we have to leave a day early? Do we have to stay 3 days late? So be really on top of it with, the weather and the snow and the avalanche hazard. One thing I think that's really fun about hut trips, and one thing that can present challenges with hut trips, is kind of the group dynamics and managing those group dynamics. And so for me, it's all about aligning the goals and objectives of the group. There are opportunities to kind of split off into 2 different touring groups. I think that's totally appropriate for certain hut trips. But I think it's really important that, especially within those touring groups, that the goals and objectives are aligned with everybody. And of course, the best way to do that is to talk to your partners and see what's going on. But I feel like those goals and objectives get really well fleshed out when you start diving into a tour plan and you really kind of see what you're getting into. Like, what sort of terrain are we going after here? What's the distance, elevation, slope angle? What are we really getting into here, and making sure you have buy-in from everybody. I think most folks have probably heard those ideal group size numbers of 3 to 5. We say that number because you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen making decisions together, but you also want enough people to effectively carry out a rescue if needed. However, as I mentioned before, hut trips can be quite large. I've been on 16-person hut trips before. And, when those go well, it's because kind of the group dynamic has been managed really well. And a lot of that happens with regular check-ins, like morning briefings, right? Having your AM plan, really talking about here's our forecast for not only the snow and avy conditions, but our tour plan. Now we have more information like snow and avalanche conditions. How does that adjust our tour plan? How does that change our run list, as we call it, which is the lines that we're hoping to go ski and ride, right? So really having that AM meeting is really important. And then conversely, having your PM meeting, right? Debriefing at the hut to seeing what were the conditions really like, and did we pick objectives that were appropriate given the abilities of the group and the avalanche and riding conditions. Additionally, comms are super important here. So for me, I like to have waypoints to meet folks if we do split up. I'm also a huge fan on a hut trip of having radios, right? So being able to communicate from folks that are maybe still at the hut to maybe a small group of 3 to 5 that's out still skiing. It's great to be able to check in and communicate with each other if that's the case, as well as just having communications throughout any sort of standard tour is really helpful. Another thing that I think makes, going back to this goals and objectives thing is I'm a huge fan of pre-planning because it kind of alleviates some of the cognitive load that you might experience when you're making hard decisions in the field. And so if you spend the time on the front end to really look at the terrain from afar, right? You're diving into Onyx, you're looking at the tour plan, you're identifying the routes, and then also talking about this plan with your team really helps that decision-making fatigue when you're like on that 3rd or 4th day of the hut trip and those decisions start to get a lot harder. So huge fan of pre-planning to reduce some of that stress. And then of course, it's also a great time to pre-identify hazards, right? You can see from the map, like this slope is really steep and this is where the approach trail goes. Maybe we should mark a waypoint there to remind us to check in with our touring partners to identify and assess that terrain and see if it is indeed avalanche terrain. And you can do that with all different sorts of hazards, but it's a great way to kind of start to think about it before you have boots on the ground. So just to kind of recap, like this is, not set in stone here as far as timeline, but big picture, a few weeks out, understand the amenities, understand the hut logistics. Like how does that affect your approach to packing? How does that affect your approach to getting there? Think about what the hut actually offers. Then start to look at big picture terrain, like what sort of stuff is available to us right around the hut. And then, of course, as I mentioned, goals and objectives of the group are really important. So communicate those early and really make sure that everyone's on the same page before you enter the field. With that information, you can then start building your route. So a couple weeks out. Then once you get a little bit closer, you start to finalize gear, make those tweaks, make sure you've assigned meal plans or whatever you're going to do as far as cooking and eating. And then you continue to kind of refine that route based on the team's goals and objectives. And of course, skiing and riding conditions. And then as we get like really close to the hut, you really want to start narrowing in on what's going on in the mountains from afar. So you're looking at forecasts, you're researching the seasonal snowpack history, right? Because that does influence kind of our decision-making in avalanche terrain. So you're doing everything you can to kind of get a feel for what the snow and avalanche and weather conditions are going to be. And then finally, you have a lot of information that you can really start packing, really start shaping up that plan. And like I said, confirm those goals and objectives with your group, given those most recent snow and avalanche conditions. And then, of course, we can continue to use as many tools in our toolbox as we can. And a lot of those, fortunately, can be accessed right through the Onyx app. So I think Andy and I want to kind of talk you through like how we might go about mapping out a zone. For the last webinar we talked a lot about the Peter Eston hut, which is one of my favorite huts, and that's what's on this screen here. But what we're going to do is Andy and I are going to work together and just kind of like start from scratch and talk you through like what tools we use, what functions do we use to start to build a tour plan. So Andy's switching over. He's pulling up the Onyx desktop app, and he's going to zero in on a little area known as Cameron Pass, Colorado. The reason we picked this zone is I spend a lot of time up here. It's a great spot. It's well, I dare I say it's less crowded than other parts in the Front Range of Colorado. It's got some wild ski terrain, but the Colorado Mountain School also has a yurt there. So as you can see, right where Andy's marker is, it looks like that yurt is in Andy's hut folder, which as of today, I believe has 101 huts. Is that right, Andy?
Yeah, am I on mute? I just got 101 huts in there. I got some in the east, most in Colorado, a bunch in California, some in Oregon and Washington, and even a few in Canada. and I'll just keep adding to it. But we will make sure everyone can access that folder, and it's not collaborative with this entire crew because that can get a little out of control. But we'll share it with everyone.
Right on, Andy. So, yeah, thanks for putting that together. I think that's a really cool resource and a great use case for a collaborative folder. Um, so Andy's zooming in to kind of Cameron Pass zone. What he's hovering over now is kind of the classic. Actually, he's very close to the pass. And, let's just say we've booked the CMS yurt, which is that brown waypoint there. And, something that's a little unique about this hut can be a great experience for some and feel maybe a little too cush for others is the approach is like a whopping 100 meters from the parking, right? So this is that hut that you don't have to think about packing strategy. You can just, bring the kitchen sink over there. You can have very lavish meals. There's a 6-burner commercial stove there. There's a refrigerator in that yurt. So this is one of those huts that you can really, really have a great time with cooking and hut amenities because it's so close and it really doesn't require much of an approach. So I won't get into too much detail about the approach here, but I certainly do map out the approach. I typically want a plan A, B, and C. And that A, B, and C is typically going to have to do with skiing conditions on the access and egress, and then safety conditions. And so, for example, last month, when we talked about the Peter Eston hut, the approach I like to take is very direct, but it's also steep. And that can be problematic for folks skiing skiing downhill through tight trees with heavy packs on at the end of a long hut trip. And so I like to have a couple different ways to exit safely from the hut. In the case of the yurt, it's pretty straightforward, but I certainly use kind of the route builder functionality, which we'll use in a minute here to map out my approach. And then one thing I like to do is like Andy's giving us a nice little aerial flyby. So right now, like it's pretty brown, right? This is not making me psyched for skiing right now. So a lot of times I'd like to turn on the snow layer. So Andy, could you just like click on the snow layer for me and let's get a different vibe here that's more indicative of skiing conditions we might experience. And this is a good tool because it gives you an idea of like what terrain may or may not look like. In addition to that, we've shared with you in other webinars that you can actually look at the recent imagery as well to truly understand what the snow actually does look like in, I believe, 2-week increments. And for me, I use this all the time if I'm going to a new zone and I'm booking a hut trip on the tail end of the season. And so if I want to know what Cameron Pass looked like in like, the second week of April last year, it's going to give me an idea of like, do I bring trail runners? Do I not? Like what slopes are holding snow in the spring? And so, yeah, Andy just clicked in April there. And now this gives me real-time information about, according to last year's weather patterns, what the snow pack is going to be looking like during this time of the year. And I have used this often with hut trips because you will see that some of these huts become available later in the year because people have started mountain biking and rock climbing again, even though it's the best time to ski steeper, fun spring objectives. So a lot of times I have used this layer to decide if it made sense to book a last minute hut trip that was available. So again, like we're starting big picture here. Andy's giving you this like 360 aerial view. And then fortunately, I'll just call it out. Beacon Guidebooks has already given you a ton of beta, a ton of information. And so it takes a lot of the legwork out of it because there's already pre-identified skiing and riding zones on this map on Onyx. If those didn't exist, you have to do a lot of legwork for yourself. And that becomes a much deeper process, like tree density, aspect, elevation, things like that. Or, if you're not starting from scratch, you can get a lot done a lot faster. And so like Andy, if you exactly. Andy just clicked on the north face of 7 Utes and you can see over on the left side of the screen, it's going to give you information about that actual ski run. It's going to tell you the current avalanche conditions. It's going to let you know where it stands on the 8 scale. And so it's level 3 complex. If you slide down, you get a better overview of the profile as far as vertical relief, distance, slope angle, all those things. Some of the Beacon Guidebooks have a write-up, a full description. And then it's going to give you the nearest, again, it's going to relink you to that actual CAIC forecasting zone. And it's also going to link you to the nearest weather station, which is the Joe Wright weather station about 2 to 3 miles up the road. And so you can actually click on that and get actual data from that weather station. Additionally, you can also just get weather, which is going to be a point forecast. And so Andy's showing you right now, that's some sad numbers of 0 inches in the last 24 hours of recent of precip. But yeah, we can also get like a point weather forecast, which Andy's pulling up right now. And so this is from that point in the middle of your screen right there. We get, of course, the winds, precipitation, all kind of great information, sunset, sunrise, and then you're going to get a multi-day forecast as well. And then it gives you options to click on links to dive deeper into the weather. Other things I'm going to look at here are kind of aspect. Like, so aspect for me is a big one. So Andy, if you could just kind of flip on the aspect layer, if that's possible.
Yep.
That's, like I said, it's so important to understand like where the avalanche problem is. So if you have the forecast, you can look at the rows and what aspect the problem has been forecasted on. And so I might flip this layer on to help kind of guide my decision-making process and start adding runs to the run list that should be appropriate given the avalanche forecast. And so you can see here, based on what Andy clicked on, he just had the legend up. So you know what stuff is facing north, south, east, or west. And that can help you make decisions and make sure that you're not riding inappropriate slopes that are in a problem area as forecasted by the bulletin. Another thing I use all the time is going to be slope angle shading, which I believe we shared in our last webinar as well. But that is a great way to give you kind of a big picture understanding of how steep that terrain actually is. And if you zoom into 7 Utes Summit, yep. Nice. Okay. So like just down of the summit, it's like red and purple, right? That big red and purple area, but it's also south facing. And so it's usually like not void of avalanche problems, but they're less frequent to develop there, but it's also very thin. Like midwinter, there's like 3 inches of snow there because it's scoured and south facing. Conversely, on the east northeast side, you also see a lot of colors there, and that terrain is very real. And that avalanche, that is a very prominent avalanche path that runs the length of that ski run. And so, kind of having slope angle shading there, that whole face that Andy's cursor's on is really fun skiing, but it also can be quite hazardous. And so without even stepping into the field, I know a couple things. One is like that slope should be assessed, but also that exit track that Andy's got there. Like, Andy, I'm curious to see what's going to show up, but there's a brand new feature on Onyx that, at least the name was changed, but it's been here for a year, is the Avalanche Simulator. I'm really curious to see what the Avalanche Simulator is going to say about that path and how close it's going to get to the approach trail. Andy, you want to talk through this a little bit as far as like what we're seeing as far as colors and this newish feature within the last year?
Yeah, you'll see. So the runout simulator is it's an avalanche simulator that uses a gravitational model, a mathematical model to predict where and how far an avalanche could run, and the color is a way of describing how big it could be if it has a huge slab on it or a small slab on it. So in these, it's a little bit easier to understand in these more isolated avalanche paths. Let's go to that south aspect of 7 Utes. So like Jason said, usually there's not a slab on here. So it's unless there's a 1 in 100 year kind of event, you probably won't see an avalanche go this far. But physically and mathematically speaking, an avalanche could run as far as this, as far as this right here. And then you'll see, in that more green blue, you'll see, maybe one every 30 years, 10 to 30 years, you'll see avalanches run all the way to there. And so this can really help you if you don't want to cross avalanche paths today or during your trip. This really helps you visualize that avalanche path and where something could go to. And then it gives you a bit of a likelihood and frequency. And that is all described in the layer details here. But I actually sometimes have fun when I'm trying to learn how this layer works and trying to show other people how it works. You can turn on the potential release area, which is a starting zone for avalanches, which is kind of the opposite, not the opposite, but it's a way of saying like, here's where an avalanche could release from because it's basically steep enough and it's not dense enough trees. So we take things like slope shape, slope angle, and then tree density. We put those things together and we say this is a starting zone. And so it could start here, and then you turn on the avalanche simulator and you see, and it could end there. So it's like a little, video game from the 80s, where you can actually see an avalanche and predict it a little bit better and really be able to have good informed conversations with your group.
Love it, Andy. Would you spin us around back to the north face of Seven Utes?
Yeah.
So I'd like to just kind of use those tools and then talk about how I might like plan a route. And so, we've got that pre-listed approach or descent track from Beacon, that kind of runs right to that gully. Andy already has the run out simulator, which you can see like it's possible to reach that trail from the north face of Seven Utes, or the northeast face of Seven Utes. And so now you have to start thinking about contingency plans. Like, does your tour plan align with the avalanche forecast and the potential size of avalanches? And do you need different plans for your day? And so, Andy, why don't we just map out a quick loop up Seven Utes? So if we start at the yurt.
Yep. So building a route.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want the run out simulator on still?
Yeah. Why don't you leave it on?
Okay.
And so often my first thing I'm going to do is I'll just start from the yurt like Andy's doing. And Andy, I'd love you to just kind of follow that terrain. So you see it's snapping right to the line. And then we're going to cut, head up the valley, and then we're going to cut hard right. Yeah. Yep. Hard right. Love it. Yeah. So this is often the route I actually take, to do kind of a well-rounded tour, depending on where the best aspect and elevation is. And I work my way up the Northwest Ridge route. Yeah. So Andy's kind of following this. It's actually a 4-wheel drive road in the summer. And then you kind of break off kind of into the woods around the corner here and make your way up to that Northwest Ridge. A benefit of this is the avalanche hazard is a lot more manageable going through here when the hazard is elevated and the size of avalanches is possible. It can be bigger, right? Or destructive. So Andy, you can go all the way to the ridge. Yep. And then I usually go up the ridge and I kind of assess snow. I go up the ridge to the summit. And if the snow quality is good, I actually will ski a lap back down the Northwest Ridge and just get you kind of that early morning pow before, it warms up at all. And then you have options from here. And like, so this to me already gives me and my group an understanding of like, how big is this route? And so right now it's 3.5 miles and 2,000 feet of gain. And so it gives me an idea of like, is this appropriate for my team's fitness? Like, how long is this going to take us? And then it also gives us options to ski variety of terrain from this point. And so I know, Andy, you can actually, I'll let you keep going because there's a lot of layers we could look at here. But at this point, you can really mess with the layers. You can look at the slope angle, you can look at the aspect. But right now we know if my team is up for doing 3.5 miles one way and 2,000 feet of vert, I have a ton of aspects at my disposal. And of course, those skiing runs are heavily dependent on the group's abilities and the snow and avalanche conditions. But that gives me an idea of like what we're in for. And so I know at least that day alone is going to be 3.3 times 2, right? Because you got to get back and how much vert and descending. But it gives us a lot of options. From that point, we've got south face. We have pretty much every aspect to possibly ski if we want it, but it gives us a lot of options. And so I might say, hey, let's create a run list here. And if let's just say, Andy, these were not predetermined ski runs, right? They weren't already there. Let's say I just identify that slope that we're kind of looking at right in front of us. I might put a line there, and say, I mark it as a potential ski run, so I'll often just kind of put a line that runs fall line. I might make some notes if I have no information about this. It might be like, possible run ? I might check tree density here to see how treed it is. But I can start messing with possible routes based on the aspect, based on elevation, based on tree density, and start coming up with ideas to share with the team to see if it's a good fit. Fortunately, in this zone, we've got a lot of information already there for us. So we don't have to do a ton of guesswork, but that is something I will do is I'll start just mapping lines on the map to try to identify good ski terrain. So Andy, let's just say we don't need to go through and map like a million lines here, but I would spend time, and Andy just turned on the imagery, right? So you kind of have a better idea of tree density, which is in Cameron Pass is a thing, right? The trees can be very tight. And so I spend a lot of time really looking to see how, if I can actually ski through some of this terrain. And of course, like I've mentioned many times, slope angle, aspect, all that stuff, super important at this phase because you want to know if you're about to ski something in an area that contains an avalanche problem or avalanche problems. So I might go ahead and do this with various different slopes, right? Depending on how much you want to geek out and really start exploring this zone. But then I'm not a huge fan of out and backs. I love loops, right? So I might map the second part of, yeah, Andy's getting excited here. He's finding all these sweet little lines in here. I might continue my tour plan and kind of map a line that's going to bring me back around. So one of my favorite ski runs in this whole area is this little shot that we're looking at in the top left corner of that ridge. It's a short shot. Yeah, a little left. It's actually just no left right there. Yeah, that thing, I've skied that in amazing conditions multiple times. Yeah, it's a great way to kind of you can do some mini golf there. It's only like a 400-foot shot, and then you kind of recycle it and keep skiing. And then when you're ready to call it a day, actually, usually, yeah, exactly. And then I go back up to the ridge, Andy.
Okay.
Yeah, and then
skip back up to the ridge.
I usually skim back up to the ridge. Yep, and then I head to the left, kind of down ridge. Yep, perfect. And I'll drop in on the Mailer Glades, and kind of still, yeah, you're right around there, and kind of drop in from there. And so it's a way to kind of what Andy's doing is like he's drawing these lines, but I do this all the time to paint a picture of like what we're in for an elevation and distance, understanding from the group. And so you got to calculate in all those upturns. And then I'll kind of find this exit track, as Andy knows well. You're kind of working your way all the way out, and then eventually you'll rejoin. You'll rejoin a different road there, and yeah, exactly right, and ski back over to the yurt. So again, there we go. Andy nailed it. So one thing about mapping that is now you have options. So you now know kind of what you have in store for you as far as vertical gain and distance. You kind of know a bunch of ski lines, whether they're pre-existing or not. You know about potential avalanche hazards, right? And you can adjust your plan based on the real-time information you're getting. And of course, the CIC bulletin, in this case, in Colorado. And with a loop tour like this, it's great because if you get to the top and you go look at that ridge and you determine that it is too steep for you to enter that. So Andy, if you zoom back up to like the Mailer Glades kind of zone and like turn on some slope shading, this is a great spot that I use all the time in avalanche education course. This ridge is very tricky when it comes to slope angle shading. And when I say tricky, it's like you may or may not be threading the needle, and the right answer based on avalanche conditions is to just go back up to the summit and come down the way you ascended. But the good news about this is you spent the time to plan this out. You had a conversation with your team ahead of time, and now a lot of that cognitive load is lessened, and you have an easy out. You don't like what you're seeing. The hazard's too high, so it's okay to just kind of ski back down the Northwest Ridge. So the beauty of the tour planning ahead of time is it allows for greater communication, and you can really start to paint a better picture of like what your hut trip experience might look like. Andy, what did I miss?
I think what you just touched on was something that you had talked about earlier, which is the eights scale. The release area and the run out layer both feed into the eights scale. It's just a way of being a little less jumbled with all those colors and all those things. Talk about cognitive load. This is just, three basic colors that we're dealing with: green, blue, and black, which doesn't mean easy, difficult and really hard. It means simple terrain, challenging terrain, and complex terrain, right?
Yeah.
And what you just talked about, the situation of planning something where you have a plan B and kind of an exit route and a safe, easy out, is like, hut tip number one for me, right? Like make sure that you go somewhere where you do have easy outs. And the definition of challenging terrain, there's a large definition, but the ending definition is has options to reduce or eliminate your exposure. And that's what we're talking about right here. So that's what we see with the blue. and the green is you're going into an area where I see a few options to reduce and eliminate my exposure. So
Yeah, Andy makes a great point. Like for me, I've always seen it as like simple terrain. You've got a lot of outs. Challenging terrain, you have far fewer outs, and complex terrain. Like once you commit to that zone, it is very hard to exit if you decide it's not a good place to be right then and there. So the 8 scale, as Andy has up, kind of gives you an understanding, big picture understanding of what the avalanche terrain is like, big picture on 7 Utes. Yeah. Another thing you can do is, like you can add waypoints throughout this entire thing. So sometimes I might, mark like a rendezvous point on a map and say, hey, we're going to split off. And, let's say we have radios, but just in case, let's meet at this point at 3 p.m. or something, just to check in with each other. Exactly. And so you can put waypoints, like meeting locations on there so that everybody can just navigate there, even if if they split up. Other things you can do is certainly identify hazards. Like, so for example, if we were up on like the Utes, the Mailer 7 Utes Ridge up there before you drop in, you could put like a decision-making waypoint. It's like, hey, we got to talk as a team before we commit to this slope and drop in. And so you can kind of just like throw some checkpoints on you just to like remind you like, hey, I think we should talk about this. We talked about it, 2 weeks ago when we were planning this. Let's just discuss this before we drop in and make sure it's appropriate. So there's a multitude of things you can use for waypoints. But I'm a huge fan of kind of dropping them in there to help guide the decision-making process and guide my navigational process so that my hut trip runs as smooth as it can be. And so, as you can see, like Andy and I just spent a few minutes doing this, but like you can go really deep on this. You can collaborate with your team. You can tell people to kind of like investigate different zones. Like I could just spend time on 7 Utes looking for ski lines, and Andy could bump over one drainage over to like the Agnes valley and kind of start looking for ski lines. So we've got lots of options to kind of guide our hut trip and really open up a lot of ski terrain.
yeah, and what I would do after I copied that shared folder link, I made it so I could, that my hut mates could contribute to it. Then I would text or email that link to my hut mates, and they could start adding to it and contributing to it. And then once you have a collaborative folder, you can even adjust the settings for each person to be able to just view or just contribute. So there's good customization in there. But nobody can change your thing, so they can't move your waypoints or edit your lines. So we don't know if we'll ever add that feature because that could really, sever some relationships.
I like how prominent as it pertains to the 8 scale, the kind of the whole Noku and zone is. It's like it just pops when you apply the 8 layer, that entire zone. Yeah. For those of
Yeah,
you that don't know this area, it's pretty cool, steep skiing terrain over there.
that's I imagine if you're staying 7 Utes in the spring, you're going to start eyeing the Noku zone, Jason.
Yep. Totally. There you go. So super fun zone. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Cameron Pass. That it's got mellow skiing to pretty steep objectives when the snow conditions are right. And what I've yet to do, Andy, is do a full up and over from all 3 drainages there, but one of these days.
Oh, like go into every drainage and then get back to the yurt.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you say yet to do, it means this is a goal of yours.
I just think it would be fun. I think the crux is like not, well, obviously you need the right conditions, but also just like piecing your way through some of the more graded terrain as well.
This is my favorite place that I've done a masterclass and demo in because this is I grew up in Fort Collins and skied. These were the areas I skied as a teenager. So that's really fun to drive around in this. If we had only had these tools as teens.
Sorry, I guess more adventure in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're good on the demo there, unless you had something else that you wanted to.
No, that's it. I think I think we gave folks a rough overview. I would certainly encourage people to really play around. The functionality that Andy and I covered was kind of at I'd say a tier one level, and you can really go really deep with the features and functions. And so a couple of just reminders. We're kind of getting to the end of our webinar here, but I'm a huge fan of like planning early, right? Reduce that cognitive load. It gets people on the same page as far as goals and objectives. Be really clear with communication, like what's the team roles here, and that's everything from what's your role in planning the ski tour to cooking to cleaning, all those things. And then have some redundancy with your tour plan. And so anytime I go on a trip to a place that I'm either expecting any sort of weather or I don't know well, I strongly encourage my entire group to download the tour plan for offline use, so we have a lot of redundancy. And then, of course, bring in a digital power bank to make sure that the phones aren't going to die on us when we need them. A couple other things that have certainly become challenging for folks is really underestimating how long it's going to take you to get to the hut. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of folks doing their first hut trip and kind of, being out well into the dark. And so just make sure you kind of know what you're in for and give yourself plenty of time to get there. And, be smart about packing, put some thought into it. Make sure you bring stuff that's going to make your trip really fun, really enjoyable, and really memorable. Andy, I think we talked about some pro hacks. I'd say I'll just share one of my favorite pro hacks is, I don't always track with Onyx just for saving battery life with my phone, but I do always save a track. And I've found that becomes incredibly useful, whether it's next week when I go to share this with somebody or like 5 years later. And so by actually tracking where you go, it gives you a really good idea of like how long this tour took, what it looks like, and that helps you kind of build upon and create a new tour plan with even more precise time estimates.
Yeah, I'm now realizing the theme of these pro hacks that I was contributing to was supposed to be, in the app that I work for on a daily basis. And I do the two finger measure thing is probably the most common thing that people don't realize we have because it's really hard because it's not a button to push. But if you put two fingers on in Android or in on your Apple phone, if you put two fingers on the app at the same time, it'll make a quick little point-to-point line with the distance on it, whether it be just a few feet if you're really zoomed in, or a few miles if you're zoomed out, and then it'll disappear. So if you're just like wondering like how far is it from here to there? How far is it from here to there? That's a nice little hack to do. It really is the gear item that I recommend bringing to a hut. But if everyone brings it to the hut, then it gets a little awkward. But if you want to sneak it into your friend's backpack, it's more entertaining than you might think. And the technology is pretty amazing these days.
Right on. Yeah. And then as you can see there, just downloading all the layers, 3D, it can be super helpful. It saved me a lot in like really complex kind of alpine navigation of like which col or do I sneak through. That's kind of where I really like having the 3D mode downloaded. So all right. So Kelly, do we have any questions from the crew that they want to hear Andy and I yap about further?
Yeah, we actually had a ton of really great questions. And the most pressing one people want to know about, this one's probably mostly for you, Andy, is can you talk about which avalanche and snow features are available in Canada versus the US?
Which avalanche and snow features are available in Canada and the US? We have the avalanche forecast is directly tied to Avalanche Canada's forecast. Slope angle shading is available in all of North America, so we have that as well. Last year we added the 12 to 25 degree slope angle shading as well. So anything green is between 12 degrees and 25 degrees. And that to me is a really cool slope angle shading number to use because you can often ski on that slope angle unless it's really dumped a lot of snow. You can get some good glides on 20. And so, even if you don't have eights, look for that green when you turn on slope angle shading, and that'll keep you in simple terrain. For eights in Canada, this is so eights, if you didn't know, is a technology and it's an idea developed in Canada first and foremost. And so Avalanche Canada is actually developing their own auto eights layers, just like we are, or their own auto eights data set. And so we are waiting for them to actually like develop that data set the way that we do in the United States. And then we'll start talking to them about making sure that when we put eights in Canada, that it is the same agreeing thing. We don't want to put conflicting information. But well, I won't make promises on timing, but you won't have to wait too long. And that's the run out layers and the potential release area will also be available. So what else do we have? Oh, snow imagery. I also suspect we'll see snow imagery in Canada by next ski season as well.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Super helpful. All right, and this one's more for you, Jason. Someone is wondering if, in a hut trip with a group, if you should designate a group leader.
Yeah, I mean it's always a good strategy to assign a leader, right? Like that's typically one of the first steps we use in any sort of an expedition, any sort of avalanche rescue or rescue scenario. It's always good to have a leader, and a leader isn't always like they're not the all-knowing entity. It's just somebody to kind of help aggregate group information and put it into action. And so I do think it is really helpful to have a group leader, but just remember if something happens to that group leader, like the team needs to be able to function well without that pre-assigned person. But I don't think it's a bad idea to have a group leader. I think it's a good kind of baseline, but it doesn't work for every hut trip. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Um, and do you guys have any best practices or like scenarios when you would use Onyx Backcountry for on the website versus on your phone?
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah. Yeah.
I'm a little old fashioned still, and I do a ton of stuff on my phone. I personally like to do most of my mapping on the desktop, and then use most of it for on the phone app for smaller modifications, tour planning when I don't have service, and navigation in the field.
Yeah. I really like planning on the computer. And I plan on my phone only if I have to.
Got it. And now we have a couple gear questions. People are wondering, first of all, if you guys have any suggestions on a power bank that you guys use for cold and freezing weather.
Yeah, I've had a really good luck with the with like the Anchor power bank products. Um there be warned, like several of the older ones are on recall for spontaneous combustion. But I've had really good luck with those as far as like holding a charge for pretty long, operating pretty well in the cold. The good news about a hut trip is that like you can often keep electronics relatively warm. I've done that via either keeping it with me, or if I'm on an approach for like a day, I'll crack a hand warmer and throw it in my electronics bag if I'm really worried about batteries having issues in the cold. Um, I've also like I'll do that with like a DSLR camera, things like that. Um, but I've had good luck with the Anchor one. They do pretty well, and they seem to hold the charge pretty well, and they're not that heavy.
Yeah. I have a goal zero one. It depends on the hut trip. If it's just 1 or 2 nights, I might just bring just a small thing that I don't even know what the brand is, but just something small. But if I think we're gonna have a lot of power needs, I've got a goal zero one that's just below the threshold for being able to fly.
Yeah.
And it lasts a very long time. It has the little magnetic thing that you can charge with on the top, and then all the different ports and AC plug and all that stuff. And that's my favorite thing to bring, but it is heavy.
Yeah, a brick.
Brick.
But worth it, usually.
Yeah.
Um, and Jason, what are some things that you keep in your repair kit?
Oh boy. Um, I actually I have it written up somewhere, and love to be able to share it more publicly. Like I said, it's not light. I think it's 2.2 pounds. Um, Geez, there's a lot in there. I carry certainly, at a minimum spare parts, right? So I've got spare tail clips, spare tip clips for skins. I've got extra screws. I do have a couple of parts that are specific to my boots. I do carry a spare binding toe piece, like a Dynafit toe piece with me. I certainly carry extra baskets, hose clamps, epoxy, steel wool. I have helicoils, which are inserts for ski the holes where you mount bindings. If those get stripped, there's ways to kind of make those salvageable to some degree, sometimes usable even. Um, I do carry a small drill and like some wing nuts that I can actually punch through the entire ski. That's when you know your trip's probably coming to an end. If your skis have turned into snowshoes, right, for flotation, that's like when you start to drill into your ski and when you start to use hose clamps to strap bindings in your boots to the ski. That's when you're probably not doing too much shredding anymore. But there's certainly help in getting you out of the mountains. Um, yeah, so it's fairly robust, but I've used it a lot, and so I've been pretty happy to have those things with me when I need them.
It's really stinks not to have it, the right thing at the right time. There is a video I found when you asked the question, Kelly, by Colin Zacharias, a mountain guide in Canada, who he has a repair kit in that video that I thought it's a really good, appropriate kit for a typical recreationist. Um, I'll paste the link to that video in here if that's all right with you, Jason, just because I
Oh,
thought
please, yeah, Collins
saw
X
that video maybe
wired, yeah,
7 or 8 years ago. I was like, that's my kit right there. And
yeah,
whenever it's gotten a little thin, I open the video again and see
yeah.
what it's supposed to have.
And I go back and forth. Like I don't always have that Dynafit toe piece in there with me. Like if I'm just day tripping, it's usually not there. I usually don't have epoxy with me. But yeah, there's certain things that I have used to extend and salvage hut trips and yurt trips because I had brought those items with me.
Wow, you were very prepared. Someone actually during the class looked you up, Jason, and found some sort of like storefront where you have your gear Rex.
Yeah.
Would you be able to paste that in the chat?
I can. It's actually it's not fully built out. I just started adding to it. It's a local guy out of Jackson started a kind of it's basically like a gear list affiliate program called
Hmm.
rendezvous.co. That's co. And I could certainly find that for y'all. But fair warning, I've just started to add to it, so it's far from comprehensive at the moment.
Cool. It's so helpful. We'll definitely be checking that out. Um, and then we covered this in the last class, but just for the people who weren't there, could you guys give a brief overview on the best way to book huts? Like especially right around now, and a lot of them are probably booked out. What's the best way to find openings?
Yeah, as we talked about last time, it really depends on the zone that you're planning to explore, right? So you've got huts all over the world. Some of those hot spots are going to be certainly like Colorado, Utah. As we mentioned before, there's lots in California. There's a few in New England. Canada is a very well known, incredible hut system. Europe, and so the best thing you can do is just start researching the area you're hoping to explore. Some of them have organizations that allow you to book the huts through. So for example, in Colorado, we have one of the hut divisions is the 10th Mountain Hut Division, and you can actually just book several different huts through that one site if you're a member. If you go to Europe, if you join the Swiss Alpine Club, you can book most of the huts through the Swiss Alpine Club. A lot of them have their own individual websites that you can book directly through. And so I think the biggest thing is to identify like where you want to go and then start looking at huts in the area and then usually through like a quick online search you can kind of find out like where to book it. And then I think the biggest thing you can do is maintain on their like mailing list. They'll often let you know when hut reservations will be open or a lottery will be open, and so kind of putting that deadline on your calendar and making sure you're right on it when you get a chance to throw your name in the hat to book that. um, and then just making sure you're kind of staying on top of things and getting a group together and seeking interest. So, Andy, anything else you do as far as kind of hut bookings and things like that?
With like when it comes to late hut bookings, I mean, first of all, I'll start thinking about next year at this point. And with some of those like sought after Canadian huts, you have to be thinking 3 years in advance sometimes.
Yeah,
But when it comes to hut booking late, when it's like this time of year, and I'm like, oh, I really want to go on a hut trip, I'll really try to carve out some weekday time in the spring, and I'll bet you anything you can find a lot of open hut days between Monday and Friday all over Colorado in April when it's the biggest secret in backcountry. The skiing is the best. Longer days, deeper snow, usually more stable, not always, but usually, and there's no one out there.
totally.
I just
Also, pro tip. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Andy.
I just spoiled the secret now, but I've been spoiling the secret for 15 years, and still everyone goes mountain biking instead. So that's the biggest trick is like take some days off, go on the weekdays.
Hmm. I was actually checking on the local huts. I'm based in California and I ski in Tahoe, and the Claire Tappan Lodge hut system still has a bunch of dates midweek. So if anyone's in the Tahoe area, you should check that out.
Right on.
And then the last question before we go through some resources you have, Jason. Andy, do you have any update on when we are going to have these features in Europe?
No updates on when we're going to have them in Europe. I'm a little bit more confident about Canada, but there's no news on Europe right now. I'm sorry to say.
All right, and with that, let's go to the next slide.
Yeah, Cruz. So again, thank you so much for kind of hanging out and sharing sharing some time with Andy and I as we talk about planning for a hut trip. If folks have any questions for me or are interested in any sort of instruction or guiding or going on a hut trip, there's my kind of contact information. Love to hear from y'all. I do work with the Colorado Mountain School and the American Avalanche Institute, right? So Colorado Mountain School is a guide service. We guide all over the world, but predominantly here in Colorado. And then of course, all of our avalanche education is done through the AI, the American Avalanche Institute curriculum. So those are some great resources, both the AI website and also the American Avalanche Association. And then, Onyx, as will, this webinar will live kind of on the YouTube channel, but the Learning Hub is a great resource for like figuring out how to really drive the Onyx tool really well. And so don't hesitate to like take some time, go through those videos, get really familiar with the Onyx app before you go on your first hut trip. And then of course, like what snow conditions, avalanche conditions are so incredibly important. So make sure you are in tune with your local avalanche center or the avalanche center at a faraway destination that you're planning on visiting. So here's just a few resources that I strongly recommend you exploring further.
Sweet. And as you guys know, this QR code isn't working, but we added a few links in the chat that are working. So make sure to check that if you do want to access the 70% discount code. And other than that, that's everything that we had for today. So thank you so much, Jason and Andy, for walking us through this super informative class. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.